On December 12, 2024, Indian Grandmaster Gukesh Dommaraju became not only the 18th World Chess Champion, but the youngest ever to do it. He beat the reigning champion Ding Liren in a championship match that went the full length, winning it in the second-to-last game before the tiebreaks after Ding traded into a losing endgame. It was an absolutely monumental achievement for Gukesh. Truly, all of his life had led up to that moment. But was he really the youngest? Chess championships began in a grey area in the year 1834. Where a world champion was not recognized. In this era, a casual head-to-head match between two of the world's leading players would define superiority on the world stage. Names like Adolf Anderssen and Wilhelm Steinitz might be familiar, but even still, the youngest was only 21-year-old Paul Morphy. In the following era of organized world championships predating FIDE, still the youngest world champion was Emanuel Lasker at 26 years old. So even including the historic early days of chess, Gukesh Dommaraju is still the youngest, right? Well, he would be, if it weren't for the split championships between 1993 and 2005. English Grandmaster Nigel Short had just won the 1993 candidates, qualifying him for the World Championship match against reigning champion Garry Kasparov. Both Kasparov and Short claimed that FIDE had not consulted with the two players regarding the location of the championship, which violated FIDE's regulations. Neither player liked that FIDE were taking 20% of the prize fund for themselves as well. In response, the two players split from FIDE and formed the Professional Chess Association, and held their own World Championship match under better conditions. FIDE's response to this was similar to Ding Liren versus Jan Nepomniachtchi in 2023. Second and third place from the 1993 candidates automatically qualified for the 1993 FIDE World Championship, Anatoly Karpov and Jan Timman. So, over the next 12 years, 12 different world champions were named under the two governing bodies, giving light to 8 disputed world champions. The youngest of which, Ukraine-born Ruslan Ponomaryov, who was crowned champion in 2002, aged just 18 years, 3 months and 12 days, 3 months younger than Gukesh Dommaraju. In today's video, we'll be looking at exactly how Ponomaryov became the youngest world chess champion and why he was forgotten so easily. The 2002 FIDE World Chess Championship was completely different to the traditional head-to-head matches we see today. In 1993, the format was changed to a knockout system. The candidates were abolished, and 128 players from around the world qualified for the event. The matches would begin in a round of 128, all the way until the two best players met each other in the final, much like the FIFA World Cup knockout rounds. Ponomaryov qualified for the event as he was ranked 19th in the world at the time, with the top 20 rated players all automatically qualifying. The event was flooded with class, having 8 of the top 10 players in the world participating, barring Garry Kasparov, who had initiated the split championships in 1993, and Vladimir Kramnik, who had dethroned Kasparov in the year 2000. Ruslan, who was 2,684 ELO at the time, would face Chinese international master and 110th seed Wenliang in the round of 128. He drew the white pieces in the first leg and dissected his inferior opponent's Caro-Kann defense with 13 moves of perfect theory. Ruslan kept probing at Wenliang's position, first creating a bishop-knight imbalance and then opting for permanent structural damage for his opponent's pawns. By move 35, Ponomaryov was offered a queen trade, which would be the nail in the coffin for Wenliang. The Chinese master would have 4 separate pawn islands, but most importantly, it wasn't his turn to move. If it were black's turn to move in this position, it would be drawn. Ruslan continued chipping away at the endgame, and eventually won after 46 moves by resignation, with an unstoppable 3-on-1 pawn advantage on the queen side. In the following leg, Wenliang would play the perplexing 1b3, which did not help his chances in bringing the match to a tiebreak. Ponomaryov overwhelmed the white king side with his heavy pieces, and dark squared bishop by move 18. Forcing his opponent to find sharp moves. A slip on move 21 from Wenliang saw the black advantage skyrocket to -2, but Ponomaryov missed the crucial knight f4. Eventually, Ruslan forced the queen trade and cruised to a draw in a game which he appeared to never leave the second gear. So, Wenliang's campaign ended in just the first round, and Ruslan would move on to the next. Ruslan was presented with a far greater challenge in the round of 64. He would verse 46th seed Grandmaster and 3-time Dutch chess champion Sergei Tiviakov. Tiviakov didn't get out of the gates quickly in the round of 128 against his 83rd seed opponent, American-born Grandmaster Larry Christensen, after failing to secure a decisive result in both legs with black and white. It would take the rapid tiebreaks to separate the two players, with Tiviakov winning both legs in dominating fashion. Ruslan would draw the black pieces in the first leg, with Tiviakov challenging him with the Roy Lopez warm-ult attack. After 30 moves of near-perfect play, Tiviakov would miss the opportunity to recapture a knight in the center with the c-pawn, creating a passed pawn and the only winning chances of the game. Instead, an impenetrable fortress was built by Ruslan, and the game ended indecisively. In the second leg with the black pieces, Tiviakov drew Ponomaryov into an accelerated dragon. It was an opposite-side castled game of perfect theory for 17 moves, with both players unable to break each other down in a middle game they were both clearly comfortable with. This time, it was Ponomaryov who missed the winning opportunities. However, the winning intermezzo of Queen b4, Rook b6 and Queen a5 was unclear, as a pawn drops off the board for both players. But the important follow-up of Queen b8 comes for white, with the backwards pawn on d6 indefensible for black. Ponomaryov went for the rational g3, however, locking black's queen out of his queenside completely, but forfeiting any kind of advantage in the process. The game would end in a draw after 36 moves by agreement. The two masters could not be separated in the first legs, so tiebreaks were forced. Tiviakov with the white pieces again drew Ruslan into the Roy Lopez. However, this time he opted against the warm-ult attack and settled for the Columbus variation. However, on move 16, Tiviakov made a huge error in his attempts to reroute his knight to f1. Just enough time was allowed for Ponomaryov to break with d4, forcing the white pieces to the defensive as the black pieces were prepared to flood the position. In the end, Tiviakov got too tactical for his own good after bishop takes d5, missing the g takes f5 intermezzo with tempo on the knight. If bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, and there would simply be too much pressure on the g2 square with rook g8 to come. Tiviakov made one last effort with queen g5, but Ruslan put the nail in the coffin with the brilliant knight h3 check, forking the king and queen, with rook g8 to follow it if it were captured. Ponomaryov only had to cruise for a draw with the white pieces in their final game, opting to play the same 15 moves of theory as their second match. Ruslan had the majority of the winning chances, and a small lead on move 33 grew to a huge lead on move 39, where Tiviakov simply left his king for dead on the opposite side of the board to all of his defensive pieces. Ponomaryov would beat the Dutchman 3-1 over 4 games, taking him to the round of 32. Ponomaryov's biggest challenge thus far would confront him in the round of 32 in the form of 14th seed Grandmaster and 3-time Bulgarian chess champion Kiril Georgiev. Georgiev had a brisk run to the round of 32, only needing to defeat 115th seed Fouad El Taher from Egypt and 78th seed Lazaro Bruzon from Cuba. However, both rounds were decided in the tiebreaks. Ruslan was taking no prisoners in this tournament though, and absolutely bulldozed the Bulgarian number 2 over 2 legs. Kiril played the knight off Sicilian against Ruslan, and even had a sizable -1 advantage against the Ukrainian by move 24. But as knight off Sicilians usually do, the position was unfathomably volatile and required extreme caution from the winning side in order to maintain an advantage. But despite Kiril's sizable lead, it wasn't the fact that the position was sharp that led to his demise. It was the fact that he didn't know his position was advantageous at all. Georgiev spent the next 12 moves shuffling his pieces around with no idea whatsoever on how to improve his position. By move 36, it was Ponomaryov who had a +1 advantage. But what was worse for Georgiev was that his opponent knew why he was winning. The Black King, which was seemingly safe for the first half of the game, suddenly came after fire after Ruslan's queen h5. Georgiev attempted to defend the threats with tactics, planting his knight on f5, with the e4 pawn being pinned to the king. After Ruslan played queen f3, breaking the pin, Kiril dared him to take his knight after bishop d7. Should Ruslan take the knight, the resulting endgame would be a draw, as black would play queen takes f3, rook takes f3, and bishop c6, winning the exchange with 3 passed pawns on the king side. Ponomaryov continued with bishop g7 to combat this, but Georgiev miscalculated the endgame, playing king c8, because now, after the knight is captured and everything is traded off the board, the 3 passed pawns are not enough for black, as white has one of their own on the h-file. The game went on until move 57, where Kiril Georgiev resigned in an unsavable position. Ruslan would go into the second leg playing 21 moves of theory as the black side of the Roy Lopez, an opening he won against in the round of 64. Needing only a draw, Ruslan was in cruise control until a brilliant rook sacrifice from Georgiev, which put the result in doubt. However, Georgiev followed up his sacrifice in the wrong order, first capturing on c5 and then proceeding to take with e takes d5. This order might have allowed his light-squared bishop to spring to life, but also allowed the d5 pawn to come under fire from beneath. After another misstep by Georgiev in the form of queen h6, completely blundering the d6 pawn, the game looked completely lost, and in an attempt to keep the queens on the board on move 39, Georgiev blended mate in 7, allowing rook e1 with bishop e3 check to follow. Ponomaryov had absolutely decimated the Bulgarian giant, firing him into the round of 16. Ponomaryov would continue his enthralling championship run with a tie against 3rd seed Russian Grandmaster Alexander Morozevich. It was quite clear by this point that Ponomaryov would have the hardest pairings in the entire tournament. Morozevich, although arguably inferior to his Russian counterparts in Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov, has been the Russian champion twice and represented Russia at the Olympiad on 7 occasions. Morozevich had a fairly easy run to the round of 16, beating 126th seed Nugzar Zilyakov, 67th seed Krishnan Saskiran, and 35th seed Mikhail Gurevich in the rounds prior, with no games going to tiebreaks. Ponomaryov began with the black pieces and was immediately at home, again handling the Roy Lopez with the black pieces. However, the difference was, this time he found himself playing against the 3rd seed. The Ukrainian immediately found himself in a worse position, opting for a line that rendered his pieces extremely inactive. Desperate for activity, Ponomaryov sacrificed his knight, anticipating that once captured, f5 and e4 would win the piece back. However, what he had not anticipated was that bishop g5 was holding onto the piece for white. If e takes d3 now, the rook's attack on the bishop on e7 is discovered, and white will win back the piece with a massive initiative. Even if bishop takes g5, evading that threat, knight takes g5 comes with its own potential of landing on e6 after the pawn reclaims its piece, forking the queen and rook. Ruslan is forced to play bishop f6, allowing bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, and bishop e2. Whilst he has reclaimed his piece without going down any pawns, his knight is stranded on a5 and his bishop is trapped on b7. By move 28, Morozevich cashed in on the stranded knight on a5, and 5 moves later, after going down an entire piece, Ponomaryov found himself needing a win against an unstoppable force. With the white pieces, Ponomaryov was drawn into the French defense against the Russian titan, but Morozevich had already made concessions by move 14, allowing a +1 advantage after the misstep of c5. Morozevich needed to keep the center closed to avoid white punishing his weakened kingside structure from the opening, but instead allowed white to gambit a pawn and take full control of the game. The Russian defended the offensive as best he could, but not only had he forfeited back the gambited pawn, but an additional one too. Impressively, Morozevich held the attack off all the way until the endgame, and if it weren't for the a-pawns, it would be a draw. Ponomaryov used his pristine endgame technique to convert the game into a draw, and take Morozevich into the tiebreaks for the first time in his championship campaign. With the black pieces, Ruslan was again challenged with the Roy Lopez, but played a stunning 97% accuracy game. Neither player held any kind of advantage in the game, and it was rather obvious that these were two of the strongest players at the tournament. In an incredible display of Roy Lopez knowledge, the game fizzled out into a draw on move 43 by agreement, and Ponomaryov would have the white pieces in the decider. A Roy Lopez with the reversed colors was in order for the next leg, with Ponomaryov opting for the Neo-Archangel-esque variation. It became quite clear early on that Morozevich was not as proficient as the black side of the Roy Lopez as Ponomaryov was, allowing a +1 advantage by move 16 after playing the slow a6. This allowed the Ukrainian to strike forwards with f4, unleashing his rook into the attack whilst breaking down the black center. Ruslan rushed into the attack though, following knight g6 with f5, allowing the knight to land on the outpost. But several moves later, on move 23, Ponomaryov was afforded another mistake from Morozevich in the form of bishop a7, allowing rook takes f4. But again, Ponomaryov missed the crucial follow-up of d4, shutting the bishop out of the diagonal and quickly plays queen g4. But in time pressure, Morozevich doesn't spot the crucial defensive move bishop e3, and defends with g5 instead. This allows the white queen to invade enemy territory and trade off at just the right time, because when the dust settles, white claims the open e-file. Black's knight is stuck on the side of the board, the bishop is trapped on a7, and the rook isn't active. It only took 13 moves for Ruslan to convert the endgame against Russia's finest, and qualify for the quarterfinals of the World Chess Championship. Ponomaryov was afforded no break in the quarterfinals, drawing 6th seed Russian Grandmaster Evgeny Bareev. Bareev had quite an easy run to the quarterfinals, due to upsets elsewhere. facing 123rd seed Mikhail Gluzman, 59th seed Vladimir Baklan, 38th seed Konstantin Sakayev, and 43rd seed Jan Elvest, who incredibly beat Ilya Smirnin on his way to the round of 16. Ruslan would begin with the white pieces, being drawn into the exact same French defense burn variation by Bareev as his fallen Russian counterpart Morozevich. A much more rational approach was taken by Evgeny Bareev in this game, knowing full well how capable Ponomaryov was with the white pieces in his preferred lines. After an uneventful 28 moves, the two players agreed to a draw in a great defensive effort by the Russian. In the second leg, with the black pieces, it was Yevgeny's game to lose. However, Ruslan was faced with an unfamiliar task. Bareev played 1d4. Ruslan accepted his opponent's queen's gambits and entered the Furman variation of the classical main line. A questionable opening choice from Bareev, it would seem, as the refusal of a theoretical queen trade on move 7 saw black completely equalize. It didn't appear as though either side intended on winning this game. Bareev allowed Ruslan off the hook in the opening, and the black side made no attempt to spring forward any kind of attack, drawing the game into the tiebreaks. Yevgeny chose to defend Ruslan's 1e4 with the modern defense in the next game, to which Ponomaryov deployed his Pseudo-Austrian attack. Ponomaryov, who had displayed an incredibly vast knowledge of opening theory thus far, had stumped his opponent by move 7, inducing the mistake of e6 and claiming a +1 advantage already. The Ukrainian continued to improve his advantage until move 18, where he missed the crucial bishop takes f5, which would have allowed e5 to break forwards with the defense of the knight. Instead, knight takes f5 was played, blundering equality, and Yevgeny Bareev was back in the game. After arguably being worse for some moments after, Ponomaryov found the incredible queen takes e6 check, sacrificing his queen for the enemy rook, the only move to continue the game for white. After the trades were made, black's bishop stuck on b7 was felt massively, and allowed white to proceed down a queen for a rook and a bishop. Knowing his position was materially and somewhat practically inferior, Ponomaryov teased Bareev with a draw on move 29. However, Bareev, who was determined to prove his advantage, refused, giving Ponomaryov a +2 advantage down an entire queen. Every one of the white pieces was involved in the onslaught of the black king, and after king f8, Ponomaryov sacrificed his rook, as the pawn on g5 was pinned to the queen. Bareev resigned on move 34, with Ponomaryov only needing a draw in the return leg to seal a place in the semifinals. It would be no easy task with the black pieces though, but Bareev surprisingly went down the exact same queen's gambit line as before, this time allowing the theoretical queen trade. Bareev missed the opportunity to take the advantage on move 19. Knight takes b6, bishop takes b6, followed by rook c1 would have taken full control of the position. However, the continuation is not concrete. Instead, knight c5 is played, allowing full equality for the black pieces. What Bareev saw was that after knight takes a4, knight takes b7, and knight c3 there was bishop f3, threatening not only the knight on c6, but still the rook on d8. What he missed though was the brilliant rook d5, which Ponomaryov found to deal with both threats simultaneously. Time trouble came for both players after the trades were made. Ruslan went up a pawn after rook a1, but most importantly, Bareev tried to counteract this by playing bishop f8, attacking the pawn on g6 and forcing a structural commitment. What Bareev missed in time trouble though was the simple king e8, forking both minor pieces with the weakest piece on the board. Not only would Bareev need to play an endgame down a piece, but he'd need to also play for a win. Just 11 moves later, Bareev would resign, and Ponomaryov had sealed himself a spot in the semifinals. The familiar name Peter Svidler was his semi-finalist opponent, with Vishwanathan Anand and Vasyl Ivanchuk playing off in the opposing bracket. Svidler was 15th seed in the tournament, impressively taking down 114th seed Alejandro Hoffman, 79th seed Saruna Solskis, 47th seed Vadim Milov, 2nd seed Michael Adams, and 7th seed Boris Gelfand. The semi-finals, unlike the previous rounds, were a best of 4 games, with tiebreaks to follow if the results are indecisive. Ruslan drew the white pieces in the first match, with Svidler opting for the knight-off variation, which Ruslan had already beaten Georgiev with the white pieces. Early on, Ruslan sacrificed a knight for 3 pawns and complete control of the queenside, but Svidler was able to trade off the queens, bishops, and win 2 pawns back. However, it was the quality of the pawns that mattered, and the remaining pawns for Ruslan were connected passes. Ruslan earned himself a passer on the h-file too, tying the black king down to the king side while he made progress on the queen side. But a misstep of c4 allowed black the advantage, allowing the backwards b-pawn to be targeted whilst being blockaded by his own king. Svidler went -2 on evaluation, and all hope seemed lost for Ponomaryov in the game until move 45, where Svidler blundered his entire advantage with knight a5. Ponomaryov was allowed to play rook g4 check, forcing the black king over to then improve his own king on e7. After knight c6 check and king f8, the perpetual drawing chances were unstoppable, and the players agreed to a draw in a game Svidler seemed destined to win. In the second leg with the black pieces, Ponomaryov responded to Svidler's 1e4 with the Petrov defense. You would expect the Petrov defense to be a boring game, but it was anything but. On move 13, Ponomaryov misplayed with bishop e6, affording white a sizable lead after c takes d5. Svidler would continue improving his position until move 21, affording black the opportunity to equalize with knight c6. Equality was missed by Ponomaryov, but Svidler again opened the window with h3, to which the Ukrainian claimed equality with bishop takes e5. The diamond in the rough of this Petrov game came on the 27th move though, when Svidler sacrificed his rook with queen g3, threatening bishop takes h6. The two players repeated moves once, and continued to shuffle their pieces around just for a few moves before Svidler found bishop takes h6. A beautiful working move maybe, but not quite enough to win the game, as Ponomaryov found the only move rook d1. Svidler's one-pawn advantage would simply not be enough, as the c-pawn would fall shortly after. The players agreed to a draw, and the match went into its third game. Ponomaryov displayed his vast opening knowledge once again, switching to the Alapin Sicilian after not having success with the Najdorf against Svidler earlier. But after just 18 moves, the players agreed to a draw, in a position that Ponomaryov hadn't realized was relatively advantageous for him, as the resulting trades would lead to an irreparable pawn structure from Svidler. The match went to its final game, Svidler with the white pieces, and Ponomaryov with the black pieces. Ruslan again played the Petrov, and on move 16 offered his rook for the light-squared bishop in exchange for a pawn deep in Svidler's territory. On move 20, Svidler would mistakenly accept this rook, leading to a very difficult and sharp game for white. By move 25, Svidler made a grave error in rook f1 in an attempt to defend his pawn, missing bishop g4 in the process. Svidler desperately sacrifices his queen to prevent the position from falling apart, but the two white rooks could not work harmoniously with the passed e-pawn looming for the black pieces. Once Ponomaryov had gotten his king into the game, one passed pawn became two, and white was completely overrun by enemy forces. Svidler resigned on move 44, and Ponomaryov had secured himself a spot in the final against Vasyl Ivanchuk. The Ukraine was guaranteed to have its first chess world champion since its independence from the Soviet Union in an all-Ukrainian final. Unlike Ponomaryov, Ivanchuk also had a strenuous road to the final, beating 125th seed Batar Shovanov, 68th seed Bartrome Mache, 29th seed Emil Sutovsky, 20th seed Yi Zhangshuan, 21st seed Joel Latier, and 1st seed Vishwanathan Anand. The players were set off in the final for a best of 8 games with tiebreaks following if needed. Ivanchuk was by far the superior finalist, who was ranked second in the world several times. The first game to kickstart the final saw Ponomaryov draw the white pieces and play against the French defense burn variation for the third time this campaign. The players castled opposite sides, and it was very clear early on that this game would be decisive. Ivanchuk was playing perfect chess until move 15, where he afforded a +1 advantage to Ponomaryov, whilst he was trying to develop his bad French bishop. After a few improving moves from the white pieces, it was time to strike onwards with g4, forcing black to either counterattack themselves or play defensively. Ivanchuk first played knight d5, but Ponomaryov inexplicably didn't capture on d5 himself, which would have increased his advantage to +1.5. He instead played queen f3, allowing knight takes c3 check, but even with the move being seemingly obvious so early on, Ivanchuk also refuses to capture, playing c6 and allowing knight e4 from white. After queen c7, all hope looked lost for black. Ponomaryov continued with c4, and after knight e7, the game was +3 for white as knight g5 was found. After knight c8 and c5, Ivanchuk resigns the game and Ponomaryov takes an early lead in the final. In the second round with the black pieces, Ruslan goes down the Queen's Gambit accepted, which he's played previously in his World Championship campaign with great success. However, in this game, Ivanchuk goes for a more modern approach, choosing the central variation Alekhine system, which is commonly played today. The game was largely uneventful until move 23, where Ruslan made a grave error sinking his knight into the d5 square. After the knights were traded, Ivanchuk simply takes full control of the c-file and controls the entire game. Black cannot fix its pawn structure with c6 as the knight is in the way, and without c6, the d5 pawn will constantly be targeted. Ivanchuk would mistakenly sacrifice the exchange on move 28 though, forfeiting his advantage but still forcing Ruslan to find some extremely sharp defensive moves. However, almost immediately after, Ponomaryov blunders with bishop d6, allowing f4 to come from white. If g takes f4, then queen g4 check would come and the black bishop would hang. Ivanchuk's position towered over Ponomaryov's, and the advantage only grew as Ponomaryov tried to sacrifice the exchange back to regain some activity. Queen c4 check was the move Ruslan missed, evading the double attack on the knight and queen and entering a position where black's king was wide open. However, as the moves went by, Ivanchuk began to take his foot off the gas, trading the queens on move 36, turning a +3 advantage into a +2 one. After the mistake, Ruslan's king ran a marathon down the board and was used as an integral piece in the endgame, stretching the white pieces thin and troubling Ivanchuk's advantage. By move 45, Ivanchuk had thrown away the entire advantage with bishop g5, allowing rook g6 from Ponomaryov. With fantastic endgame technique, Ponomaryov saved a +3 position and the players agreed to a draw on move 58. The following game would see Ponomaryov play with the white pieces against the Taimanov-Sicilian Bastrikov variation. Both players played absolutely flawlessly in this game. Ivanchuk playing the cold-hearted top-engine move king f8 on move 15 is a good reflection of the precision on display. Ponomaryov made one mistake on move 18, playing bishop f7 and allowing knight d7 to harass the dark-squared bishop, but it was an unpunishable mistake in reality, only yielding a negative 0.2 advantage for black. The queens were traded on move 24, and by move 47, both players agreed to a draw, in a match that never looked like it was going to be decisive. Ivanchuk again challenged Ponomaryov with 1d4 in the 4th round of the final, entering the same Alekhine system of the Queen's Gambit accepted. Ponomaryov challenged Ivanchuk on move 10, castling the opposite side and insisting the game was decisive. After 9 moves of shuffling and improving pieces, Ivanchuk made the first big mistake, playing bishop d2 and allowing bishop takes d3. This would allow f5, and Ponomaryov's pawn storm on the white king would come before any attack on the black king. The mistakes kept coming from Ivanchuk. Bishop c2 on move 22 afforded black a negative 1.2 advantage, and g takes f3 again on move 26 saw white's king wide open and vulnerable to the black's rook on the g-file. Ponomaryov uncharacteristically blundered his advantage away on move 28, after playing rook g2 and missing rook f3, which would stop the idea of queen g8 coming to mate on g2. After the rooks were traded, the game balanced on equality until move 45, where Ponomaryov again blundered with king b6 in the endgame, allowing g4 by white, which would break open the pawns on the king side, escorted by the white king. Black's king was on the opposite side, and wouldn't be able to stop the advancement, and the black knight was also tied to the center of the board. Ivanchuk missed this chance, however, playing bishop e1, and the game was drawn by threefold repetition shortly after. In the 5th round, Ponomaryov took Ivanchuk into the Ruy Lopez, and had an extremely healthy and familiar position going into the 30th move. However, Ponomaryov seemed to push a little bit too hard on the black position, and allowed Ivanchuk some fighting chances. On move 28, Ponomaryov mistakenly played b takes c3 instead of bishop takes c3, which after all the trades allowed queen e7, as Ruslan had weakened the a3 pawn by removing its defender. A small advantage for Ivanchuk with the black pieces grew into a sizable one after Ruslan blundered with bishop b1, allowing queen e6, with black's idea to plant the queen on b3 and trade off the rooks, entering an endgame where the passed a-pawn willed queen. Ponomaryov traded the one set of rooks, and again blundered with bishop c2, thinking he could prevent the queen from entering on b6. He had not realized queen a2 was equally harmful, and shortly after, Ivanchuk had found the correct sequence with a -2 advantage. Ponomaryov traded the last set of rooks and came back to the defensive with his queen on d1. Ivanchuk made space for his a-pawn to begin rolling down the board, and by move 46, his advantage was -3.5, and it looked like the final would be tied once again. However, on move 47, Ivanchuk let Ponomaryov back into the game with king g7, allowing queen d2, and suddenly white white had counterplay on the open black king. First, Ponomarev kicked the black queen away from the passer, and then proceeded to trade off the queens. Ivanchuk's advantage had vanished, and black's doubled a-pawns were rendered useless as white would lock off the entire a2 to h8 diagonal with connected pass pawns. Just a few moments later, it looked like it was white's game to lose, with the connected passes marching up the board unopposed. Ponomarev took his chance after Ivanchuk played king c8 on move 58, simply marching his king all the way up the board, forcing Ivanchuk to sacrifice his bishop and winning the game by resignation on move 64. Ponomarev turned around a negative 3.5 deficit into a mate in 5 in the span of 17 moves. As things stood, it didn't look like the final would need 8 games to decide a winner. Ponomarev led 3.5 to 1.5. If Ivanchuk lost again, Ponomarev would be the champion. What better way for Ruslan to hold onto his title than to play the Petrov in the following game? Ruslan played the Mason Showalter variation of the Petrov, constricting white's potential out of the opening. Ivanchuk initiated some trades on move 15 to try and make some space for an attack, but if anything, it benefited black more than white. The players continued to shuffle the pieces around, but it was obvious Ivanchuk wasn't going to get the result he needed in this game. On move 24, Ivanchuk played d3, allowing everything but the rooks to be traded off and transposing into a completely drawn endgame. On move 27, both players agreed to a draw, and Ponomarev only needed a draw in his next game to become world champion. Ruslan would play the white pieces against a deflated Ivanchuk in the penultimate match, with Ivanchuk surprising him with the Alyakin's defense. Ponomarev demonstrated exceptional opening knowledge once again, outplaying Ivanchuk out of the opening whilst gaining a plus 1.5 advantage. Ivanchuk had absolutely no form of counterplay for the entire game. On move 17, Ponomarev threatened the g5 pawn with rook h5. Ivanchuk defended with g4, allowing Ruslan to force the queens off the board and at least get a draw from the game barring a miracle. After rook g7, the white rook would feast on the black pawns, and just a few moves later, the players would agree to a draw, even though Ponomarev was plus 2.2 in the position. He had no reason to continue playing, as he was crowned the 2002 FIDE Chess World Champion in the 7th round of the finals. Ruslan Ponomarev's 2002 World Chess Championship campaign was one of the most dominant performances in a World Championship I have ever seen. Not only did he have the hardest path to the finals, he also breezed past his opponents like they were beginners. In the final, Vasyl Ivanchuk quite literally gave up out of respect for his fellow countryman's exceptional performance in the championship. The justification for brushing Ponomarev's 2002 World Chess Championship campaign under the rug was that it was not undisputed. This was because of the absence of only 2 players, Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov. Gukesh Domaraju's recent success in the World Chess Championship was nothing short of incredible, and this video is to take nothing away from his massive achievement. But in the same sentence, Magnus Carlsen was not involved in the 2024 World Chess Championship at all. But even if we accept that Gukesh is the youngest undisputed World Chess Championship, the headlines suggest otherwise. Every single one leaves out the word undisputed. It seems like no matter where you look, just 22 years on, everyone has forgotten about Ruslan Ponomarev. But should they? In 2023, the World Chess Championship was watched by an average audience of 148,000 worldwide, and just a year later, that number rose to 193,000. In the year 2002, there were only 2 Indian players inside the top 100 ranked chess players. In 2024, there's 15. Vishwanathan Anand inspired a generation of young Indian chess players to go onwards and achieve greatness, but he was 31 years old when he became a disputed world champion, and 38 years old when he became undisputed. Gukesh Dommaraju isn't an inspiration to the next generation of Indian chess players. He's an inspiration to young people from across the world. And if a small stretch of the truth inspires hundreds of thousands of young players to start playing chess, I don't think Ruslan Ponomarev would mind.